The following video has been brought to you by the Dunning-Kruger Effect Corporation, proud sponsors of the Flat Earth Cult. So I'll start out by saying that this is going to be my last video on the Flat Earth Cult. I would never have addressed the topic at all had they not started appearing on the channel, I guess drawn by the channel's growing popularity. And I wanted to state where I stood on this right off the bat and nip it in the bud. This is not the channel to bring your cult nor attempt to dicker a debate about it, and going forward, any flat earthers that appear will instantly be blocked, period. I'm not interested in arguing with flat earthers for the same reason that I don't argue with children who believe in Santa Claus, though, at least with children, it's cute, they're children. But when adults hang on to stuff like this, in this day and age, it's just sad. When you think of persons using satellite-enabled global communications technology to argue the Earth is flat, like I said in the past, that takes a very special kind of stupid. And it's just not something I really care to waste time arguing with. What I did want to discuss, though, is what was to me a horrifying outcome that was demonstrated in the last two videos that I did on the Flat Earth Cult. Allow me to explain. In the first video, I pointed out that flat earthers qualify as a cult because, like any cult, they use positive and negative social pressure and cognitive dissonance to drive new persons into the fold. And also like any cult, they require belief in something counterfactual, despite all evidence to the contrary. In the second video, I pointed out three things any flat earther could do for themselves to experience the reality of space overhead and the curvature of the Earth. The model of the flat Earth, accepted by much of the flat Earth cult, requires that there be no 24-hour sun in Antarctica. And the myth is somehow strangely perpetrated by flat earthers telling themselves nobody's allowed to go to Antarctica. So I pointed out that any of them can at any time go to Antarctica, and pointed out a few travel sites that they could use to get there. And if a flat earther wants to see the curvature of the Earth, all they have to do is buy a weather balloon and put a camera and a transmitter on it. A decade or two ago, that might have been extraordinarily expensive, but these things are easily accessible these days. And for a few $1,000s, any individual or flat earth group could buy a weather balloon and the hardware and send it up. Weather balloons can reach up to 30,000 meters, which is more than enough to see the curvature of the Earth. And for that very special Space is Fake crew, I pointed out that anybody can buy a telescope and a camera, or even just a pair of binoculars, and see for themselves all the amazing things that are in space. Now, between those two videos, at the time of the making of this video, there are a little over 4,200 comments. And it was way too much commentary to follow all of it, but let's say between a quarter and a half of that came from flat earthers. And while I couldn't keep up with all the comments, I did read hundreds of the replies. And here's the thing, in their replies, not one single flat earther, not one, was willing to do anything to test their beliefs. They weren't willing to do any of the experiments or try anything. What they did was quote slogans like, "The Earth is measured flat," referring to how, say, if an architect is going to build a house, they might measure 10 by 15 meters and lay down a flat foundation. A few others cast insults. That's what desperate minds do in the face of facts. They toss ad hominems. And there were even a few of those old, tired, lame accusations that I was part of NASA's big conspiracy. By the way, NASA, I really need my check. I could use the money. And so could all the other conspirators in China and Australia and Europe and every place else in the world people do astrophotography. Those who did try to respond with, I guess, something they thought was an intelligent response, made bizarre statements that misunderstood science and mathematics in ways that were, well, there's no other way to put it, just childish. One person noted Earth cannot be a globe because everything on the underside would fall off. And another argued that there is no such thing as gravity, that's just the effect of acceleration because Earth accelerates forever at 1g. Another person said Earth is obviously covered with a dome and that's what holds in the air. If there was no dome, nature bores a vacuum, so all the air would evacuate into space. And the Space is Fakers, who are an even more special crew than flat earthers, argued that somehow NASA had programmed telescopes to show things in space that were not there. Which is a very interesting one, since a telescope is just an empty tube with some lenses in it, or a mirror and lenses, and they've been around for centuries, long before there was even a USA. And I'm sure if you have even a reasonably modest bit of education, you're hearing these statements and thinking, either I'm full of BS and this is unbelievable and nobody would say those things, or you're having a huge, huh? moment. I mean, how do you reply to persons that think that way? It's another reason why I can't be bothered to argue with flat earthers. If their understanding of basic science is so broken, how do you speak to persons like that without years of remedial education? Trying to explain even the most rudimentary science to them is like trying to explain calculus to kindergartners. Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I don't exactly agree. If you're educated and you understand basic scientific principles, you understand that it's technology, not magic. But given the degree of ignorance that I saw in the replies by flat earthers, I could certainly see how it is that they think they live in such a magical world. But here is the truly horrifying part. As I said earlier, they were entirely unwilling to do any test. They simply argued their belief system, or argued why the test wouldn't work, or argued why the test couldn't be done. They were utterly unwilling to do any tests. And to me, it is really horrifying that a person can be so determined, absolutely determined, to be ignorant. I shouldn't use the word ignorant, because ignorance should be differentiated from stupidity. Ignorance is innocence. Ignorance is just somebody doesn't know something, and it's remediated through education, through knowledge, through learning. I mean, we all honestly start out ignorant in life. I used to think the earth was hollow, and we lived inside of it because how else could the air be held in? If the earth wasn't hollow, wouldn't all the air rush off into space? I knew it would have to because I had seen balloons burst. But then I started kindergarten and learned about things like gravity and the fact that air has mass and weight. Like all children, I was ignorant, I received education, and I learned. But persons who hang on to this flat earth cult, this isn't about ignorance. This is a willful choice to deny facts. It is in fact stupidity. Stupidity could be defined as willingly embracing fallacy. Though if we were to be a little bit more technical in defining the flat earth cult, we might say they represent the Dunning-Kruger effect and they're proud of it. So if you're unfamiliar with what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, it's a psychological principle that states that when people receive education, they become aware of how much they don't know. So while they develop expertise, that expertise also leads them to understand how much more there is yet to learn, not just in their fields, but in every other field. They become humble in the face of creation, realizing the limits of their knowledge. On the other hand, persons without knowledge have not had a chance to get a real sense of the limits of their expertise. In other words, they don't know what they don't know, so they fail to understand the limitations of their lack of knowledge. And when we apply this to persons who subscribe to things like the Flat Earth cult, what we see is the Dunning-Kruger effect with gusto. They are appallingly ignorant of science, and that makes them absolutely certain that they understand it. Add in the echo chamber of a cult, and you get the Dunning-Kruger effect magnified. Ignorance with determination. They have literally convinced themselves that their lack of knowledge, their pseudoscience, is an ideal, and they avoid science and knowledge and education. Because in their minds, education, scientific fact, it's all part of some big conspiracy that is hell-bent on teaching them that the world is flat. In essence, the Flat Earth cult demonstrates that when persons choose ignorance, when they actually choose it, they will defend it with an amazing degree of determination and feel very self-righteous in doing so. This is evident in the Flat Earth cult in their blanket denial of any and all evidence that runs contrary to their Flat Earth worldview. I mean, there really is no debating whether or not the world is a globe, not least of which is because there are countless images of the Earth from space. Though Flat Earthers will simply write off every single one of those images as CGI, from satellite photos to clips used by meteorologists to portray the weather. And though computers were rudimentary in the 1960s when the astronauts went to the moon, they will not only say that the astronauts' trip was fake, but that imagery was also CGI. And of course, images shot of space by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of astrophotographers all around the world, that's just CGI. And even when some of their own went to Antarctica during the summer to prove that the sun would set, and it didn't, then they just wrote them off too. Because, you guessed it, CGI. Essentially, as far as flat earthers and spaces fakers are concerned, anything that doesn't fit their narrative, it's all smoke and mirrors and it's going to be dismissed. It is a defense of ignorance, ergo stupidity, but more than that, it is a pushy cult-fueled Dunning-Kruger effect, a declaration of I don't know what I don't know, but I'm proud of it. There really is no point in debating with persons like that. They're not looking to learn, they're looking to prove a point. But I think it is just horrifying that humans can be so vulnerable to ignorance. getting on board with it, and defending it at all costs. I know this makes this video kind of dark, and I like my videos to be more upbeat. While flat earthers and their nonsense are not something I give a whole lot of thought to, the growing trend of the world toward ignorance of this kind and others is very concerning to me. And issues such as this often lead me to think of Carl Sagan's 1997 brilliant and stunningly prescient work, The Demon-Haunted World. Let me slightly paraphrase what Sagan said. "I have a foreboding of a time when our critical faculties are in decline, and we are unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, and so slide, almost without noticing, back into superstition and darkness." It's amazing that we can live in a time when there are almost 200 space launches per year, and anyone can talk instantly with anyone anywhere in the world through satellite-enabled global communications, or point a telescope at the sky and see the substantially large International Space Station or the Chinese Space Station. And yet, here we are, teetering on the dark ages, in a disturbing era when some people choose superstition over opportunities for scientific enlightenment.